Good evening everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight for what is the first of the Drayton live trainings of 2022. I hope the year is treating you well so far. And I thought I'd take this opportunity to look at our motorised valve range. So I'll be doing an overview tonight on what the actual range comprises of, but more interestingly really having a look at some technical details. So looking at what the various wires do. So if you want to maybe test, if you want to do some bench testing to see if a valve is actually working or not, you'll be able to do that. And also some sort of in situ testing. So we've got a couple of training boards set up with bi-flow and twin zone systems. And I'll just run you through the sort of process that I go through when I'm fault finding. Because what I find is when you're out and your head's in the airing cupboard and you're right in the thick of it, you sort of sometimes lose your way. So it's quite nice to have a sort of like a defined process flow so that you're able to not miss anything, particularly when we're looking at mid-position stuff, which is a bit more complex to fault find on. I'll also take you through the testing as well. So I've got a little chart that I'll show you that just shows you the expected voltages you should be getting on the wiring. So pretty much you should be able to, if you've got a multimeter, by the end of this, you should be able to competently go through and test these systems and also be able to discern whether what the valve that you're looking at is faulty or whether there's some sort of other issue on the system, like wiring, for instance. So we'll kick off first by having a quick look at a close-up of the valves and the valve bodies and that different arrangement, and then we'll get into the live systems. Okay, so welcome to a selection of the Drayton motorised valve range. So I just want to cover some of the key features and the sort of setups that we have here will be the most common that you'll be using. I'll also show you this at the end. This is an extract from our product catalogue, and this just gives you the various part numbers. You can see you can buy these as part of a controls pack, you can buy them as a complete valve and actuator like what you get here, or you can buy them as separate. And if you want things like 24-volt motors and the slightly less popular flavours, then you will be buying those as a separate actuator with a separate valve body. But that leads me in quite nicely to one of the key benefits of our motorised valves, and that is the snap-on actuator. So you can see that you're able to disconnect the actuator from the valve body. Now this has got a number of benefits, not least because it's far easier to fit that to your pipework without an actuator with a wire flapping about. So from the initial installation, it's much easier, but also from a fault finding point of view, because obviously there's two areas that things can go wrong here. You could have an actuator that fails, or you could have something go wrong with the valve body. For instance, you could get something stuck up inside, some debris. After all, these are going to be the area where flow is restricted on a system, so if there's anything in the system that's any debris, it's likely to collect in one of these areas. So you could have an issue with the valve body where it doesn't it fails to turn, or it fails to open or close or divert, or indeed it may be that it's opening all the time, so it's not sealing off. But the fact that you can press the button in on these, so you don't need any tools for this. The actuators clip on to the valve bodies like that, and that's what this square button does here. That just activates the clip underneath. So your spindle goes up inside the hole, and that gives you the drive. And then these two little lugs here fit in to the sort of spigots on the top of the valve body. And this is the same across all our valve bodies. So this here would have been purchased as a ZA6. So this would have come in a pack with a 28mm body. So that's what it would have, that's how you would have probably bought it. But if you want to fit it to a 22mm body, you equally can. Again, doesn't matter if it's 2-port or 3-port. Now you can see here this ZA6 would normally come on a 2-port body, but all of the actuators and all of the bodies are interchangeable. Now the bodies I've got here are the most common, and that's the 22mm and the 28mm. So this is designed for compression. So this is going to be 22mm copper pipework. So this valve body here is obviously a 3-port, and that's the equivalent 2-port. Now you can see the only difference is that the 2-port has a blanking plug in the bottom, whereas the 3-port has a port which to accept the gland nut, or the nut off of that you'll have with your olive. And it's exactly the same principle with the 28mm. This 3-port has got this port arrangement here, whereas the 2-port will just have a blanking plug in there. So that's why they're all interchangeable. These follow the typical sort of compression arrangement. Let me just grab some nuts and bolts so I can show you that. So typical 22mm nut and olive, so into there, screw it down, and then you'll compress the olive onto the copper pipe. Some people get confused with these because you can see they've got female threads. So this is pretty standard stuff. Everybody's used to a locking nut with an olive with a female thread on the nut and a male thread on the actual fitting itself. The 28mm is still compression, except the olive goes down inside, and the locking nut looks more like a bush, you know, where you've got like the hex at the top, but it's got male threads. So a lot of people confuse these with being imperial. You know, they think this is like a BSP thread inside. It's not. It's still metric. It's still designed to be used with an olive, except they've got female threads on them. So your olive sits in the bottom there against that lip, and then your locking nut will screw down into there, and obviously your pipework will go through the locking nut. That's why I say it looks a bit like a bush, because it's got the hex on it, it's got a through hole, and it's got male threads. But both of those are for copper pipework with compression fittings. Now in the catalogue that I'll show you later, you can also get Imperial BSP fittings if you want, and the part numbers are all listed in the product catalogue. But if you want those, you will buy those as separates. You won't get them in a pack with an actuator. So let's start with probably the easiest one, which is a zone valve. So two port body on a ZA5. Now the numbers refer to the number of wires. So ZA5, so it's a zone valve actuator. It says it on the top. I've labelled them here just for ease, but zone valve actuator, and the 5 stands for the 5 wires. So you can see here we've got our earth and our neutral, and then we've got a wire to drive the motor, and then we've got our 2 switch wires which are on the end switch. So this is what you would use to fire your boiler. So this is typically going to be found on a twin zone system, and there's going to be multiples of them. There's going to be at least 2, but maybe 3 or 4, really up to, depending on how many zones that you've got. But the ZA5, you'll get this in all of the twin zone packs. You'll get 2 of them. And with a twin zone system, if you want to add another zone, it's easy, because you just add another 2-port motorized valve with the associated controls. Remember, what's going to be controlling these is an output from a timer and a room stat, or if it's combined, it may be a programmable room stat, or even something like a Wiser hub. So these are going to be driven by the controls that sit upstream. So quite simple in terms of fault finding as well on these, because there's not a huge amount going on. The brown wire drives the valve to the open position. When it's in the open position, inside there's a little microswitch, there's a cam as it drives from A to B. So you can see A is the closed position. As it drives to B, it hits the microswitch, and then that will allow it to, whatever's connected, whatever voltage is connected on the grey will then go out on the orange. So these are your 2 switch wires. They're volt free. Typically, you would always put the main, the grey to a permanent live, but you certainly don't have to. You could put 24 volts on here or whatever you want, but whatever goes in will come out on the orange when the valve moves to the B position. Now, as you look at this, thing to remember is that A position is closed, B position is open. When you're looking at the port, you'll see underneath the port is also marked, and the flow in should be on port A and out on port B. But you can see that they are diametrically opposed. So if you look at the actuator like that, you would assume that that is port A and that is port B, but they're not. They're actually the other way around. They are diametrically opposed. So port A sits under B on the actuator, and port B under A on the actuator. And you want to really respect the flow direction, in on A and out on B, because if you don't, you tend to get they tend to become noisy, that they'll slam close. So the idea is that the flow in here, when you open the valve, you've got the flow is helping it to open, and then the spring when it closes is designed to pull back against the flow, so that if you have it the other way around, you've got the spring going with the flow, and then you get the paddle. You can see on this one here there's a paddle up inside. It tends to bang against its seat, and you can get a bit of judder then down the pipe. So it's not the end of the world if you get it around the wrong way. You're not going to cause any damage. You know, and the system's going to work fine. It's just that you may find that they're noisy. So a 𝗁𝗲𝗃 will typically come with a 22mm body. So if you buy a 2-port from us, it will be it's 22mm. It will be a 𝗁𝗃𝗃. We've also got the 𝗁𝗃6. Again, ZA for zone valve actuator. The 6 making reference to the number of wires. So you can see here on this, we've got the same arrangement as the 𝗁𝗃5, but we have got this extra white wire. So the extra white wire is a normally closed contact, and what that's basically saying is that like before we said about the brown is what drives the motor, the earth is the earth, and the neutral is the neutral. This just gives you the other side of the switch. So whereas with the 𝗁𝗃5, when the valve is in the open position, you get an output. When it's closed, the output dies. Here you've got the other side of that switch as well. So this is like a double throw switch. So you've got your normally open. So your normally open would be orange with respect to grey, and your normally closed would be orange with respect to white. So essentially it means that if you want to have an electrical output when the valve is in the closed position, you can access that rather than with a 𝗁𝗃5 where it goes dead. Typically, we rarely see it being used. So the question always is, if I've got a 𝗁𝗃6, can I replace it with a 𝗁𝗃5? And you absolutely can, as long as this white wire is not doing anything. So if it's just in a terminal on its own, because obviously it should be safely isolated, then absolutely you can replace this with a 𝗁𝗃5. The actuator will fit on the body. Like we said, they're all interchangeable. Exactly same arrangement. So A is closed, B is open. This one here is actually locked in the mid position, and this is the vent and fill position. So this is how you'll get it as soon as it comes out of the box. Now the reason that we lock them in the middle, it makes it very easy for the valve body to be attached, because you're not fighting against the drive up inside, because it's just locked in the middle. So it makes putting them on and off really easy. But it's also the vent and fill position, so that you fit this when you come to charge the system. You're not having half of the system isolated by having the valve closed. So it allows air to vent out of the system, but also for the system to fill properly. To get it out of the lock position, you can just move the lever over like this. So if you move the lever over and pull it out, you'll see that it then drops back to the A position. Or the other alternative is you can drive it. So if you energize the brown wire, it will drive all the way over to B. In doing so, it will release the lever, and then when you de-energize, it will go back to A. This is always one that catches people out. It caught me out a couple of times when I first did it, because I fitted these, filled the system, forgot that they were locked in the mid position, and then when I called for, say, hot water, I was getting central heating as well. So immediately I'm thinking, what's going on here? There's some issue. It's not. It's just the fact that I forgot to unlock this, or call for central heating to unlock it. And again, the other way around. If you call for central heating first and the hot water one is locked in the mid position, you'll get unwanted heating in the cylinder. So just remember to either manually move it over and pull the lever out, or energize the valve and it will drive over. Once it's driven over, this will then unlatch, and when you've de-energized or stopped the call for heat, you'll go back to the A position. Exactly the same arrangement. A and B diametrically opposed to the port designation on the other side. So typically your 𝗁𝗃5 and your 𝗁𝗃6 will be used with zone valves. Now there's nothing to stop you putting one of these on a 3-port body. Remember, like I said, all the bodies are interchangeable. So if you do that, you've essentially got yourself a diverter valve, but with an end switch. Now a true diverter valve would be one of these, which is a 𝗁𝗃3. So ZA, again, zone valve actuator, but this time only 3 wires. So neutral and earth speak for themselves. The brown, all it does is it drives the valve from A to B, exactly the same as the others. There's just no end switch in there. So this is a true diverter. So this would normally be on a 3-port body. It's sort of an either or system. So, you know, it may be that if you've got you might have a cylinder that's heating up. When the cylinder stack kicks out, it then drops the feed into something else, maybe another cylinder or into a central heating. So remember, with this, one port is always going to be open. So you feed up the T on these, and then it will divert. Again, diametrically opposed. So port A is opposite to where it is on the actuator. So we'll go up the leg of the T, and then it will divert left and right. And that's all you can have. You cannot hold mid position. Don't get the ZA3 confused with a mid position valve, because all it will do is either or. But like you can see, there's no reason why, if you need a diverter valve and you can't get hold of a ZA3, there's nothing stopping you putting a ZA5 on a 3-port body and just ignoring the switching wires. So just ignoring the orange and the grey, and just using the brown, blue and earth as you would with the ZA3, or indeed the same with the ZA6. Just ignore in this case, the 3 switch wires here, and you'd just be playing with these. So you can usually adapt these to suit what you want. Right, the last one, and the most complex one, particularly from like a fault finding point of view, is the mid position valve. So the whole purpose of the mid position, there's this one here actually, if I pick the right one. So this is always going to come on a 3-port body, because one of these on a 2-port doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's an MA1. It's a 5-wire valve, and you can normally the normal way you identify these is that they don't have a brown wire. So if they've got a brown wire, typically they are a zone valve. One that, again, to be careful of is the ZA6, because that does have a brown and a white, because you remember you've got that extra normally closed contact that you can gain access to. But with a mid position valve, it says MA1 on the top. So the earth and the blue, so those speak for themselves. That's your earth and your neutral. And then we've got these 3 wires here. Now, the purpose of the white wire is to drive the valve from the W position. So you can see when the valve is completely de-energized and unlocked, again, these are supplied locked in the mid position for venting and filling. But when you unlock them, when they're de-energized, they sit in the water position. So what we're basically saying is, when you call for water, you're not actually energizing the valve in any way. If you energize the white wire, what that will do is it will cause the valve to move from the W position to the mid position, and it will stop in the mid position. And so that would be the output from your room stat. So this is going to be on the central heating side. So a call for heat with central heating will energize your white wire. The orange wire is your output, but much the same as the zone valves, but it's only your output when the valve is over completely to the H position. And remember, if we energize just the white, all it does is it takes us to the mid position. The way we get from mid to the H position is by energizing the grey. So the grey, if I was just to energize the grey now, it wouldn't do a thing. The valve would quite happily sit in water. But if I've energized the white and I've got the valve to move over to the mid position, if I then energize the grey as well, the valve will sail all the way over to the H position. When it gets there, the orange will then go live, and it will be what's feeding in on the white that's coming out on the orange. So all the grey is doing here is that's holding it or causing it to move over to the heating only position. Now, for heating only, that means you're not calling for hot water. So the grey wire always connects to the cylinder stat satisfied. So what we're saying is, when the cylinder is up to temperature, we want to energize the grey, because we're not calling for water. But also from the programmer side, the hot water off terminal needs to also connect. So your grey wire will connect to 2 places, cylinder stat satisfied and the hot water off terminal in the programmer. The orange is going to connect to the switch live of the boiler, and if you've got any associated pumps that you want to run at the same time, those will connect to the orange, and then the white will connect to the output from your central heating coil. So if you've got something like an LP and a RTS1,
then it'll be the output that comes from those two switching devices. If you've got a programmable room stat, or if you've got Wiser or the new Digistat 2 channel, then it will be coming straight from the 𝗁𝗄𝗃, so the central heating on terminal from those. So white, energized on its own, gets you to the mid position. If you're in the mid position and grey is also live, it will take you over to H. When you're at H, the orange goes live. The thing to remember is, if you were to stop the 𝗁𝗄𝗃 then, so if you were to turn your room stat down, white wire is going to go dead, the orange is going to go dead, and that's going to stop your boiler, but the grey wire is still going to remain live, and that will keep the valve held over to the heating only position. Now, a lot of people would expect it to move back to W, but the valves will only move when they're towed to. So just by stopping the 𝗁𝗄𝗃, we've not towed the valve to move anywhere, so the valve will quite happily sit in the heating position until the next call. Now, it could be that you may turn your room stat back up, in which case white goes live. We're already over at heating, so the valve doesn't move anywhere. The orange goes live, fires the boiler, and you've got central heating. But if water was your next call, the grey is going to go dead, and that's going to cause the valve to move back to the water position. So remember, the grey will cause the valve to move from mid to H, and it will also hold it in the H position until it goes dead. If it goes dead, it will then move back to the W position, or mid position if you're calling for both. I'm just going to demo that now with my little safe block here. So if we connect the neutral and the earth, you can see that the valve is in the W position. So if I energize just the white, you can see that the valve moves over to the M position. Now, when it's in the M position, nothing is coming out on the orange. So this is why, if you don't have your hot water off connected, either at the cylinder stat satisfied or the hot water off in the programmer, when you call for central heating, because the grey is not being energized, it's not moving over to the H position, and it's only when it's in the H position that the orange wire goes live. So here, you'll call for heat, the valve will move to mid position, but there's nothing to tell the boiler to fire up. If we then add the grey to that, so you can see as soon as I de-energize, the valve will go back to W. Got to be careful now to stay away from that orange wire, because when that moves over, you see we get to the M, so that's the white driving it to the M position. The grey is now taking it over to the H. You probably heard the little click there, which is the microswitch inside. So now the voltage that's going in on white, the 230 volts going in on the white wire, is now coming out on orange, and that would be firing your boiler. Now, if the white wire was to go dead, the valve is still going to remain in the H position because the grey is holding it there. Whilst we're here, I'll also demo this idea of it being locked in the mid position. So I can do it with that one, or indeed, let's have a bit of fun and do it with a zone valve. So here, I'll stick this on a 2-port body. Lock it in the vent and fill. So this is the ZA5. So this is how your zone valve actuator will come straight out of the box, like that. And here we'll energize the brown. We're not going to worry about the switch wires. Neutral. Pop the earth in. And then when I close it over, you can see that it's moving over to the B position. That lever has just unlocked, and now when I de-energize, you can see it runs all the way back to A. So you can either manually unlock them or just drive them open and then de-energize, and they'll come back. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I want to just show you the product catalogue, which has got all the details about the valves. So you can see here we've got Motorised Valves, complete valve and actuators, and that's year 22 and 28. Then you've got the spare bodies, and that's where you're going to pick up your 3/4 and your 1-inch imperials if you need them, and also spare actuators, spare motors, and a technical briefing just on what the valves will do. And then if you scroll to the bottom of the product catalogue, this is where our control packs are. So obviously the control packs, depending on whether you get a biflow or a twin zone, this is going to have the appropriate valve with the appropriate valve body size, as well as the rest of the controls. So programmers and cylinder stats for vented or unvented, depending on what you need. Right, now that we know how they should operate correctly, let me take you through the sort of routine that I go through if I'm going to fault find on one of these sorts of systems. So I'm going to do the most difficult type here, which is a mid-position system. So this has got the MA1. Now I normally start with the system completely de-energized. You see a few spurs off there, because I want to see what the valve is doing. And remember, if the last call was for central heating, the valve could be sat in the heating position. So we want to eliminate that straight away. So off at the fuse spur, and let's have a look at what the valve's doing. And you can see that it's clearly in the W position, the de-energized position. So immediately we've not got any issues there. Now, if this was still in the mid position, or indeed if it was over at H, when they're de-energized, you know it should be back in the W position. So that would then make me question what's going on with the valve body. So easy test is press the button in, remove the actuator. If the actuator was to stay in one of the positions other than W, M or H, then we've either got some sort of feed going to this driving it there, or it would be an actuator fault. If, however, when you did that, it moved back to W, then our focus would turn to the valve body itself. Is there something that's preventing the actuator going back to the W position? You can see here we've got the lever hanging out, so we wouldn't expect it to be locked in the mid position. I'm just going to lock it, because you tend to easier to get them on the bodies when you do that. And then once we're there, we'll unlock and it will return to W. So first test, let's turn it on, energize. You can see programmer is set to off on both channels, room stat is turned down, and the cylinder stat is also on minimum. So let's start by calling for hot water. So we're calling for hot water at the programmer. We're not calling it the cylinder stat, so consequently we wouldn't expect the boiler to fire, and it's not. If we then turn up our cylinder stat, we would expect to see the boiler come on. We're only calling for water, so the valve is in the water position. Next thing is add central heating to it, but we've added it at the programmer, but not at the room stat. So again, the hot water side is keeping the boiler and pump running, but we wouldn't expect to see any change here, because whilst we're calling at the programmer, we're not calling at the room stat. Now turn the room stat up. Boiler continues to fire as a function of hot water being called for, but you can see the valve is now moved over to the mid position. So all the room stat is doing here is telling the valve to be in the mid position. It's actually the hot water call that is firing the boiler. Now, this is where we can check to see that our hot water offs are connected. So if we turn the hot water to off on the programmer, we would expect to see the valve motor over to H, which it does. And now the feed that's feeding the boiler, so what's calling the boiler and pump to be running, is the white wire that's going in to the valve. So the output from the room stat on the white wire, that's moved it over to the mid position. The fact that we're not calling for hot water is livened up the grey. That's driven it onto H. So what's going on white is now coming out on orange, and it's firing the boiler. Now we know that there's another way that we can satisfy the hot water, which is through the cylinder stat. So if we call for hot water again, that causes the valve to drop back to the mid position. And then if we simulate our cylinder stat being satisfied, you can see that that also drives the valve over to the H position. So this is a fully working system. Let's say, for instance, the call for hot water is stopped. Like you can see, it's satisfied there. If we stop the call at the programmer, again, doesn't do anything, because all we're doing, we've now got the grey wire is being energized from the hot water off in there, rather than the cylinder stat satisfied. If I turn the room stat down, you can see we lose the call for heat. But like I said before, the valve will remain in the heating only position. If we turn the room stat up, all we're doing is we're energizing the white, which is going out on orange. The valve doesn't move until we make a call for hot water. So on at the programmer, turn up our room stat, and you can see that the valve will move all the way back to water. Okay, and should your valve not be moving to the appropriate positions, it's time to break out the multimeter and actually measure the wires to see what's going on. And this is quite a nice resource to show you the expected voltages based on the condition of the programmer and the thermostats. So general rule is, if you're not calling for hot water, your grey wire should be live. If you are calling for hot water, you won't necessarily see it go to 0 volts, but it will be either less than 100 or it will be under 50 depending on the condition. So one to watch out for, and it's the electronics in the valve head that are causing those voltages to not be at 0. And just for completeness, here is the same matrix but for a twin zone system. So if you're fault finding on an S-plan, these are the expected voltages on the respective wires based on the condition of your time control and your temperature controls.
Right, well that completes everything that I want to cover tonight in terms of our motorised valves. I'm not seeing any questions come in at the moment. Yes, there is one. There's a question here. What is the current rating on the Microswitch? So the Microswitches are rated at 3 amps. So that's 3 amps resistive, 1 amp inductive. So you've got to be careful on what sort of load you're driving with it, because if it's a resistive load, up to 3 amps. If it's an inductive, it's 1. Your pumps are likely to be inductive, so just make sure what the power factor on those is, and you can then do the calculation to make sure you're not overrating the switch. In terms of the synchronous motor inside, so the valve will actually, they're 5 or 6 watt motors. I think typically 5 watt motors now, 5 watt Hanson. The synchronous motors is what's in the valves. So they're not, they draw hardly any current. So particularly when for the mid position, especially if heating is the last call, then the fact that it's sat over on the heating only position and it's sinking current, it's only 5 watts. So you're not going to be burning a huge amount of energy by having it residing in that heating only position. Last chance really to get any questions in. I'm not seeing anything coming. So that just gives me the opportunity to thank you for tuning in tonight, and always appreciate your support on these live sessions. I did say on the promo the other day, if you can give me some feedback on how you prefer this. So is the timing right for you? I mean, I'll try and get them in. We always do 7 o'clock now on a Thursday, and you know, does that work for you? Would you prefer earlier, later, on a different day? If you can let me know in the comments. And also, if you think that the format is right. So I try and get it for about 30 minutes a session. How do you find that? Too long? Would you put them shorter? Would you rather have sort of 10 minutes bite-sized things? Any suggestions you've got, stick them in the comments, and obviously that will drive the future content. Keep an eye out on the group as well for the promos that are coming up. So we've got some stuff that's coming up where we're collaborating with a few other people. I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff on how to maximise the energy saving from using your existing heating controls. So the whole idea this year really is to improve our sustainability. So we want to be looking at how we can upgrade traditional systems to really drive the maximum out of it, and a lot of stuff around the new Digistat and Wiser, how smart controls are able to facilitate you to be greener and obviously save money and energy. No more questions, so thanks for joining me guys, it's been a pleasure. I'll catch you on the next one.